We plan to save some time for questions at the end of the presentation. So if you do have a question, you can either unmute yourself or you can submit a written question using the chat box at the bottom of the Zoom window. And you can either submit the question to everyone, or if you'd rather submit it privately, you can just submit it to the host and only I will see it, and then I can direct that to Tricia. So as I mentioned, we're here to provide you with an update on the One Louisville COVID-19 Response Fund, which was established about 10 weeks ago. Since then, we've seen incredible generosity in our community and have seen many partners come together to do some great work in philanthropy. We thought the best way to provide you with an update about this work is to do a question and answer style presentation. So I have several questions that I've worked with Tricia to prepare, and I'll be posing those to Tricia. And then, like I said, hopefully we'll have time for you all to submit some questions at the end. So first things first, Tricia, can you just give everybody an overview of the grants that have been distributed so far from the One Louisville Fund?
Absolutely. Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to see folks. It's a wonderful time to see some new faces, as well as some faces that we've had the pleasure of working with in the past. And so thank you for joining us today. I can say that, as Heather said, the last 10 weeks have certainly been an important period for us to stand forward. And we're so the support that we've received from the community. I'd love to bring up a quick visual to show you what your support has provided for folks. And so I'll just share my screen and where the funds have gone. So as we look at the funds that have come through in the fund opened on March 16th. And so as we look at the money that's come through the door, I wanted to bring up something that has a lot of information on it, but I will walk you through it together. And so what I'm sharing here is an overview of the funds that have come in and those that have gone out. And what we committed to do through the One Louisville Fund was to support those in our community who are at highest risk or are most vulnerable. And so if you look at this chart, you will see that out of the grants that have gone out the door, you can see the populations of individuals that have been served in our community. These are our friends and neighbors that needed additional support. And this is where your dollars have gone to help those individuals. So you can see, for example, if you look at the last line, children and youth, you can see that of the grants that have gone out the door, almost 75% of those grants have had a support for children and youth. And so since many organizations support multiple populations, you can see where these dollars have gone across the board. If you look just above that, you can see that about 60% of all grants have touched individuals in our community who are experiencing homelessness and or housing instability at this time. If you go toward the top, for example, you can see that about 40% or so of the grants that have gone out the door have supported veterans in our community. And so if you are interested in individuals impacted by domestic violence, those struggling with addiction, seniors, immigrants, low income, individuals with a disability, those that are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated and returning in community, you can see that the funds that have come through have all gone towards supporting these individual populations that live and work across our community.
Thanks,
Heather,
Tricia.
that's a quick overview of where the funds have gone so far.
Great. You know, I know that it's always a hard decision when you get so many different applications and you have to decide how to, you know, fairly and you know, allocate all of the money. How does the Community Foundation and your all's our partners decide which nonprofits to support with a grant from the One Louisville Fund?
Yeah, well, it's a really, you know, I tend to get a little bit, you know, nerdy on the process a little bit because we get so excited about running an equitable grants process. But I'll stay high level for folks and say that we have modified several things to make the One Louisville Fund be effective during the times that we're in. one of which is a really simple application that is less than 2 pages for our nonprofits to complete. Then we have a team of people that are reviewing those applications. And that team is not just the community foundation. We've engaged local government partners, corporations, and other foundations, all with professional grant writers and grant reviewers who have reviewed the grants, particularly with a lens on equity. So making sure that these dollars are going into the community in the places that are needed most. So we have 12 volunteers that have worked with us over the last 10 weeks to professionally review every single grant that comes in, every application that comes in, and each application is reviewed by more than one reviewer. So that way, when we go to committee, we have 5 voting committee members and 4 advisors, and all of us are informed by the grants that have been reviewed by a committee of 12. And so in doing so, we've ensured that we can move swiftly, but that we can allow for a high level of diligence and accuracy as we're reviewing the grants.
Thanks so much, Tricia. You know, I know a little bit more about your all's work than probably people on the call. I know there is more need than we're able to support with the One Louisville Fund and the money in the One Louisville Fund. So can you talk about the applications that have been received, but that we haven't been able to fund?
Yes, that's always, a tough spot for folks that have such a big heart and want to create such an impact. We are so proud of the impact that we've made. But one of the difficult parts of this is understanding that independent of how successful we've been at providing support, that there's much, much more support that's needed. And so I'll walk through a couple of quick examples that I think will help draw some clarity to that. So we had, I'll use the last 2 grant cycles as an example. In the last grant cycle where we reviewed, we had 442 total applications received. Of those, we were able to review in that particular week 112. And so we've worked steadily to review applications it was each week, now it's each 3 weeks, just based on the amount of funds that are left for us to disperse. And so of each time that we meet, we're specifically looking for the highest needs and any populations that we've not yet supported. And so for this particular week, we had 102 applications to review. Of those applications, the total ask or the total need was for $7.7 million. Within that, we would consider $5 million of those asks very high quality. So if we had all of the funding to fund all apps that we believed were fully high quality and meeting the needs, we would have distributed $5 million in that particular grant cycle. What we had available to spend in that grant cycle was $750,000. So $750,000 is a tremendous amount of support for this community. And we were really grateful and proud to be able to support the community with that $750,000. But really from our perspective of equitable review and high quality application, we would have loved to have distributed $5 million to meet the high quality applications. That's an example of 1 week. I'll give one more week just as a point of reference. The 2 grant cycles ago, we had 246 total applications and 115 were reviewed for that particular week. The total ask out of those 115 applications was for $5.5 million. And again, about half of that we would have considered very high quality applications, all of which deserved full funding. That would have been $2 million if we had the funds to distribute. During that particular week, based on the money we had received into the fund, we had $600,000 to distribute. And so of the $2 million that we would have been very proud to support, we were able to support about $600,000 that week. And so what I can say is this community has stepped forward from $10 to $1 million to generously provide support. We have stepped forward to really ensure that there's a high quality process to review and distribute funds but we certainly know that the need far exceeds the funds available for us to be able to support.
And Tricia, based on the applications, it sounds like hundreds and hundreds of applications are coming in every week. What do you see as the main areas of need in the community?
We have two sources of information for that, Heather. One is the applications that are coming in, which we continue to see new applications from our nonprofit partners all the time. The second is Metro United Way and City of Louisville. So City of Louisville and Metro United Way both have 311 and 211 information portals where families and individuals can call and say, I'm struggling with food insecurity, or I'm struggling with my rent or utilities, and be directed to the resources that exist across our community. And so by partnering with Metro United Way and the City of Louisville, we're able to access that data as well. And what we see is not terribly surprising. The top 3 needs have stayed fairly consistent across the 10 weeks. The top 3 needs continue to be access to food, support and assistance with housing, and support for utilities. So those continue to be the top 3 areas that we are seeing need for support. What I will say is some needs and some opportunities fluctuate a bit as well. And so the other that we've seen come in quite a bit are supports for children and students. So for example, when schools first closed, we saw a lot of requests for support for students in virtual learning and virtual engagement so that students could continue engaging intellectually at home. And now that we're moving toward the summer months and school being out, we're also seeing a tremendous number of supports for students to be engaging at home, and as well as offices and employment start open up without childcare being fully open, we're seeing an increased request for childcare support as well. And so there are 3 needs that have stayed pretty stable, and then we continue to see sort of ebbs and flows for other needs as the weeks go by.
So much for that. If the people on the call, our generous supporters and fund holders, are interested in learning 1 or 2 things that they could do if they wanted to do more, what are the 1 or 2 things you would want people to know if they want to do more in this work to continue supporting those great areas of need?
Absolutely. Well, I would encourage folks to do several things. And I think 1 or 2 things that would be really important to me is for folks to stand by the nonprofits that they believe in and that they trust and that they know are doing great work. And so I want to kind of encourage people to stay active. And I want to just encourage folks. I'm going to share a screen here that if you're looking for a bit more information, you can go to a couple of sources that will help you. One is the Community Foundation's homepage. You can find a link to our One Louisville website. There's a tremendous amount of information there. One of the things that you'll find on the page is a full list of the 148 organizations that we've been able to support through your funds so far. So in that, you would know that each of those organizations has been vetted by the full review panel, that their work is being monitored, and that we're aware that they're meeting very current needs in this community. So if you wanted to look for in organizations supporting others with food or with youth services, you could certainly use that list for organizations that have been vetted as doing high quality and much needed work across this community. That information is on the One Louisville page and is continually updated each time that we distribute grants. Another great resource for information is the Greater Louisville Project. If folks aren't familiar with the Greater Louisville Project, they are an independent data partner that reviews the needs in our community and where we are against those needs. Greater Louisville Project is continually putting out information. And so for those of you who are data driven or want to see more information broken by geography, where needs are in West Louisville versus East Louisville, et cetera. Where we're faring on employment opportunities. The Greater Louisville Project has a large set of data that we know is helpful for people as they're considering the need in community. As far as taking action, I would encourage people to spread the word and to join in. We have 1,400 donations that we've received through the One Louisville Fund, which we're grateful for and proud of, but we know that we're a community of 770,000 people. And so whether you're supporting the One Louisville Fund, whether you're supporting our nonprofit partners directly in the work that they're doing for neighbors and community, all of us can do something, whether that's giving of ourselves or our time, whether that's volunteering and serving, whether that's giving a donation. But I would encourage all of us to give generously. This time that we're in, the crisis that we're certainly in an acute period right now, but we understand that the impacts are largely going to continue to impact those that are most vulnerable and those that had a lack of support systems going into the crisis. We also know that the economic impacts and the emotional impacts are going to be long-term for people. And so what I would encourage is for folks to continue to stay active and to encourage your friends to stay active, whether that means giving dollars or giving time. I think each one of us has the capability to contribute and to do our part, as well as to encourage others. Because if each one of us reaches out to 3 people to make a care package or help a neighbor or provide funds, then we know that that impact spreads across community. And so for those that are on the line, I would say the single greatest thing that you can do is to stay active and to encourage others to stay active, because we know that while our attention spans may move on quickly, the need is going to be lasting here in this community.
Thanks so much, Tricia. One thing, we've had a couple people join a little bit later. We're going to open it up to questions. So as people are thinking of questions, again, feel free to either use the chat bubble at the bottom of your screen to submit a question, either to me or to everyone, and I'll direct it to Tricia, or you can unmute yourself. But as people are thinking of questions, would you mind, Tricia, just sharing a summary of the total grants that have been distributed from the fund, just in terms of numbers, so that people kind of have a understanding of how much has been distributed from the fund? And I think it's been over 100 organizations.
That's right, Heather. So in just the 8 weeks that we've been active with granting, we've distributed over $8 million. We're at about $8.6 million. And those funds are going to neighbors across our community in 2 ways. The first is through individual support for households through Louisville Metro government. The next is through our nonprofit partners that are providing direct service. I see several nonprofit partners on the call today, and we know that each one of those are providing direct support for our neighbors as well. And so we've been able to support 148 nonprofits through the fund, as well as 1,600 individual families through the work that Louisville Metro has done. And so that's over $8 million in about an 8-week period.
Great, thanks, Tricia. I've got a question submitted. Is there any tracking of how much funding is going to LGBTQ people or organizations?
That's a really good question. That was actually an area of focus for us. And now that the question comes in, it reminds me that that's not on the graph that we have. And so that's an opportunity for us and I'm just going to make a note to myself, to make sure that we add that to our reporting. There have been several weeks particularly that we invited and focused on in our review period. I mentioned we had areas of focus for each time we reviewed, and LGBTQ+, particularly also support for LGBTQ youth who are experiencing additional alienation and isolation at this point. And so we have, in fact, had that focus for several weeks. What we found, particularly on, there were a couple of populations, LGBTQ being a primary one, where we didn't receive a lot of applications right away. So one of the things that we did behind the scenes was monitor where we are receiving applications from. And for populations that we felt deserved and needed support, that we weren't receiving applications, we conducted outreach to organizations and invited them to apply. And so one of the things that we've seen over time is that by being able to have this process running now for about 10 weeks, we've been able to reach populations that didn't apply initially or early on. Maybe they weren't as connected, maybe they didn't have time because they were providing services, but we've been able to help reach that population more in the last 3 grant cycles because we were able to encourage specifically those nonprofit partners to apply for support. So that's a great question, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'll make sure that we add that to our report.
Thanks, Tricia. We've got another question, and I'm just going to read it. It's got some good context. While this pandemic has been unique as a national and global disaster, will you continue to maintain this type of fund that could be utilized in future disasters? If so, have you begun discussions regarding what would constitute the use as it relates to a special disaster? Examples could be Katrina or 9/11.
Sure.
So two-part question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So everything, our goal at the Community Foundation is to be the partner for folks to come together and to make a significant impact in this community. And so what I can say is this emergency response effort has been much larger in scale and much more complex than typically we have served in the past. But the Community Foundation for years has stood up emergency support funds every time our community has experienced a loss. Tornadoes, when we had the pipe break in Smoketown and Shelby Park, when we have storms come through or other tragedies, we've always stood up an emergency response fund and made sure that that response fund meets the donor intent of the crisis at hand. What I can say is we'll continue to do that, and we will continue to stand up emergency funds as needed and as opportunities, as occurrences warrant them. We have had an emergency fund in the past, and we worked with other community foundations to talk about having a standing disaster response fund. And what we found both in our efforts locally as well as what we've monitored across the country is people tend to be motivated by a specific cause. So while we've had a disaster and emergency response fund, a general disaster and emergency response fund open, we've not found that folks are motivated to give to that in the past. We found that folks are typically motivated by a specific action and a need at hand. And so we may consider maybe the appetite for that maybe has changed for folks now, but we know that we can stand up emergency response funds within 24 hours. And so what we've done in the past is act really quickly and responded to a crisis as it occurs. And we found that to be something that people want to engage with more. The other thing that we do, Heather, is we have the Fund for Louisville. And I know a couple of folks on the call have donated to the Fund for Louisville and given. But the Fund for Louisville is a standing endowment that supports open needs in this community. And we have folks that choose to give to the Fund for Louisville, knowing that those dollars will go out every single year to meet the current needs. So what I would say is if we find that there's a difference in appetite for also adding a standing disaster response or emergency response fund, we would feel very, very comfortable standing forward with community to add that. And it may be that we want to ask some folks now if the appetite for something like that has changed.
One more quick question, and I think we mentioned these numbers earlier, but can you give just a summary of the total funds raised into the One Louisville Fund and the total amount distributed?
Absolutely. So the total funds pledged so far is a powerful $10.7 million. We know that other communities that are even larger than Louisville have not had the success that this community has had based on the generosity of support we've received. So $10.7 million have been pledged. Of that, $9.9 million has been received. So we're still waiting on just about $1 million to come in for folks that are, processing those funds now. And so far, we've distributed $8.6 million. We have another grant cycle coming next week where we anticipate giving approximately over $1 million or even up to $2 million. We're going to continue to look at how much money has come in, and we've continued every single week as funds have come in to distribute nearly in full what's been received. So 10.7 pledged, 9.9 received, so far 8.6 distributed.
Great, thanks, Tricia. And how long, this is another question from the viewers, how long do you see this fund continuing to exist to address ongoing needs?
Mm-hmm. It's a really, I would say that's the hardest, most difficult question. And so what we've tried to do, and we've put a ton of thought into this, is look at how we can best serve our community. And one of the things I'll pull up just quickly is a slide that shows why we focused on this fund as it could do. Oh shoot, I'm on the wrong page here. Let me just show, look like the screen's closed. Well, what I would say is the fund shouldn't and can't last forever. And what we know is that donations are really declining. Folks provided a lot of early support. We are seeing some decline in that. And we know that's a natural part of the process. We know that folks want to give to nonprofits that they support regularly, and folks have provided generously. So we'll continue to run the fund, but we know that the fund has a natural cycle. And we're going to focus on encouraging folks to give to the nonprofits that they support, and to continue to standing up the community, in the ways that we would traditionally. So we won't be able to run the fund forever, but we've noticed that money coming in has declined, and so we're going to commit to giving the rest of that money and meeting it with the same process that we've had to date. And certainly any additional funds that come in, we are wholly committed to getting those distributed.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. We did have a question right after that about the pace of donations. Are they sort of declining? Are they still steady? Do we need more donations? So you kind of just addressed that, and I think certainly we're encouraging people to continue to support, but we are seeing the contributions slow down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we don't have any other pending questions with the chat bubble, but does anybody want to unmute themselves and pose a question directly to Tricia or myself? Take a minute.
Could you tell me the average size of the grants that were made?
Deb, that's a great question. I don't have an average on me. I can tell you the range of the grants, but I'm sorry I don't have the average, which I'd be happy to follow up with. But we have grants that are anywhere from just over about $1,000 to grants that were right around $75,000 or $80,000. I can tell you also the size of the organization, which a lot of people have been interested in. We've supported nonprofits that have annual budgets well under $250,000, some nonprofits that have budgets as small as $30,000, all the way up to organizations that have budgets well over the $10 million mark. And so you can see the range in grants, and grant size is also often correlated with the size of the organization and the need as well. As far as an average, I don't have that, but I can follow up. But I'm hopeful that the range of understanding the size of the org and the size of the grant will help as well.
Tricia, we have another question via the chat. And you mentioned the numbers of applications earlier, but are you seeing applications increasing every grant cycle, that you're getting more, or are they decreasing?
We have seen grants, we have seen the applications increase almost steadily. I'm thinking back almost every single week. There were a couple of weeks where it held pretty steady, but we still have almost 500 applications active right now in our system. And so what we know is nonprofit need is really, really high. And I would say that we've continued to see couple of weeks that were fairly steady, but for the most part, we've continued to see increases in the application.
Great, we've got another question. How much in grant dollars went to the direct emergency grants that the city distributed? I assume that question is referring to the grants that went out to individuals. at the
That's
state?
right. So Louisville Metro's process of distributing grants to individual households, that number's still in flux because they're still serving those appointments. As of yesterday, the mayor announced that they'll be filling 1,000 new appointments. So what I can say is those households that have come through are receiving about $800 in support per household based on the households that are coming through that process. Right now, we anticipate that dollar amount will end up being around $3 million that we will have distributed through the One Louisville Fund.
Great, thanks. Does anybody want to unmute themselves and ask another question? I don't have any pending right now in the chat bubble.
Well, Heather, I'll offer a closing comment from my side just to say that I think we were able to activate really quickly. And that was based on the fact that we had so much trust from donors, trust from nonprofit partners, trust from the city of Louisville and the community at large. We had so many folks step forward. The Louisville Bats raised money. We had everywhere from sports teams to a teenage girl who raised money in her neighborhood and contributed to the fund. And so what we were really proud of is being able to stand forward and offer people an opportunity to make a difference in their community by joining together. And we're so proud of the funds that we've raised. But what I would say is we all know there's deep, deep need existing. And so for folks that are continuing to commit to this community, I invite you to take the actions listed, to continue to encourage your neighbors and friends to contribute in the ways that they can, because we know that the need is still so, the need is nearly overwhelming. And so while we're so pleased with the support and hope we've demonstrated wonderful action, we also encourage others to keep moving and keep being active and generous in the community.
Thanks so much, Tricia. And I just want to thank everyone who's participated on the call, everyone who has supported our efforts through the One Louisville Fund. If you have any additional questions, you can always reach out to Tricia or myself. We'd be happy to help answer questions or help you all the generous individuals on this call fulfill their charitable goals. So on behalf of the Community Foundation, thank you again for participating. We really appreciate your support, and I hope everyone has a good rest of your day. Thanks again, Tricia.
Thank you.